All right, and take it away.
All right.
We are.
All right. Welcome to the July 16th, 2024 Zoning Committee, ZOCO, meeting. We will be holding a hybrid public meeting, which enables remote electronic participation as legally authorized by the Code of Virginia per the Planning Commission's electronic meeting policy adopted on July 7th, 2022. Members of the ZOCO are participating both here in person and virtually with electronic meetings. At this time, I'd like to orient everyone to our hybrid environment and cover a few specifics about tonight's meeting. Members of the public may attend the meeting here in person or electronically by using the Microsoft Teams provided on the ZOCO webpage, the county's event calendar, and the email notifications sent to ZOCO email subscribers. Additionally, there's a dial-in phone option for those who wish to use it. For our virtual attendees using Microsoft Teams, please turn off your video feed and keep your microphone muted as you enter the meeting and during the meeting. The Microsoft Teams meeting chat will only be used to provide instructions for virtual attendees on how to register for public comment and to field general questions about Microsoft Teams. Teams chat will not otherwise be monitored by staff or the Planning Commission during the meeting, nor will it be used to collect feedback. Unlike the Planning Commission's regular meetings, the ZOCO agenda items are not public hearings. Therefore, public comment is at the ZOCO chair's discretion after the committee discussion has concluded. Public comments associated with agenda items can be provided by people attending in person and virtually. For in-person attendees, indicate on the meeting sign-in sheet that you would like to provide public comment. And for virtual attendees, indicate in the Teams chat that you would like to provide public comment, and your name will be added to this list of speakers. As a reminder, you can always provide written comments via the link that is provided in the Teams chat and on ZOCO's website. All written comments will be shared with the Planning Commission and posted to the ZOCO page for public viewing. All comments received as of noon today have already been shared with ZOCO. I will call for speakers at the end of the meeting, and I will ask Mr. Rogers to let me know if we have any virtual attendees who would like to provide comment. Mr. Rogers will acknowledge speakers in the Teams chat. Members of the public attending virtually will speak first, followed by in-person attendees. When virtual attendees are called upon to speak, you must unmute yourself by clicking on the microphone icon that is located on your meeting command bar. The moderator does not have the ability to unmute you, though we do have the ability to mute you. Lastly, this is a public forum. Today's meeting will be recorded and posted to the county website. All information associated with today's meeting, whether written or spoken, is subject to the Freedom of Information Act requirements. All right.
So, Mr. Chair, with the agenda that was posted online, we'd actually like to do a slight switch on the agenda. What we'd like to do is lead off with the structural interior alterations and additions item, and then have the recovery residences item second. So for what will actually be our first item,
Sure.
that'll be Ms. Garrett and Ms. Brown presenting that.
Okay, yeah, that's good with me.
All right, well, I'm Kelly Brown, and I'm with the Comprehensive Planning Group, Section Supervisor there. Emily, Garrett, and I worked on the zoning works amendment.
Should we introduce?
Oh, a round of introductions.
Round of introductions.
Sorry.
Right, thank you. My name is Tony Strider. I'm with the Planning Commission.
Jim Lantelli, Planning Commission.
I'm Usher Sabrin. It's my first time visiting you. I'm with the American Civics Institute. We do affordable housing.
Leah Bagley, Planning Commission.
Lawyer Hussein, intern, CPHD.
Emily Garrett, CPHD.
Like I said, I'm Kelly Brown. I'm in the Comprehensive Planning Group in the Planning Division.
I'm Cliff Hogan. I'm CPHD in the
Nick Rogers, CPHD Planning Division and ZOCO Liaison. Mr. Chair, if you'd like to welcome some of our online attendees to provide interactions,
Yes.
you're welcome to do so.
Yes, please. Well, let's get Karen first. She's walking in the room. Just a quick little introduction.
Oh, hi, Karen Gavad, I'm Planning Commission.
All right, any commissions from online who'd like to speak, introduce themselves?
Emma, go ahead. Start with county staff.
Hi there, I'm Emma Martin, Associate Planner with CPHD Current Planning, not a commissioner.
Hey everyone, Matt Matuzek, also with the Planning Division.
Assuming
I
that's
I
everybody.
think that's all your introductions.
That's everybody, all right. So now that we're all introduced, shall we move to the first agenda item? We shall.
So Emily and I worked on this zoning ordinance amendment together, and she is going to be staff presentation. So I'll hand it over to Emily.
Great. So I'm going to give a presentation on a zoning study to permit interior structural and limited exterior alterations in non-conforming multifamily and townhouse dwellings. So staff is recommending a zoning ordinance amendment to enable interior structural alterations and limited additions for creation of window wells for basement egress, exterior stairs, ramps, and decks in non-conforming townhouses and multifamily buildings in RA and R27 districts. Over the past 2 years, there has been an increase in number of variance requests. There were 24 applications for variances in Arlington from 2023 through May 2024. 16 of these variance requests were for interior structural alterations, 7 were for construction of basement egress windows, and 1 was for replacing a window with French doors and adding steps. The only application that would still require a variance in the application for replacing the window and adding steps, since the proposed amendment does not allow exterior structural alterations that would perpetuate the non-conforming nature of the dwelling. So to alleviate the burden of pursuing BZA approval for certain home improvement projects in Arlington and other communities, and giving homeowners flexibility to invest in their build wealth and better accommodate household needs, it's appropriate to consider amendments to the zoning ordinance when variance requests are not unique and are heard frequently. So here are 2 examples of the exterior structural alterations that would be permitted by right. On the left is an example of basement egress windows. These are required to convert basement space into bedroom space and provide a safe means of escape or entry in case of a house fire or other emergencies. On the right is an example of a ramp, which would allow for those with disabilities to safely enter and exit the unit. And then some interior structural renovations frequently heard in Arlington include removing walls, separating the kitchen from the dining room, and finishing attics. So some background, the zoning ordinance requires that non-conforming buildings and structures be brought into conformance with zoning standards before structural interior alterations, building additions, and expansion may be permitted. A building can be non-conforming if it does not meet setback, building separation, density, building height, or parking requirements. The intent of this requirement is to encourage eventual replacement with new buildings and structures that meet current standards. This conflicts with goals for preservation of older buildings that may have cultural or historic value or provide lower cost living options. The zoning ordinance provides flexibility for structural interior alterations, additions, and expansions for non-conforming 1-family and 2-family dwellings and expanded housing options. But this flexibility is not extended to non-conforming townhouse or multifamily properties. The only paths to pursue structural interior alterations or expansions for non-conforming townhouse or multifamily properties are through a county board use permit in conjunction with provision of a low and moderate income housing plan, a neighborhood's form-based code use permit, which also requires inclusion of affordable housing, or a variance from the BZA. So this table here shows multifamily and townhouse units developed by right in the RA and R27 zoning districts. These districts at some point have permitted townhouses and multifamily buildings by right since they were originally established and now contain a number of non-conforming units as the districts have been amended and became more restrictive over time. There are 1,622 townhouses and 29,043 multifamily units in these zoning districts that were not developed through a special exception. Multifamily units include condos, committed affordable units, or CAFs, market rate affordable units that are affordable up to 80% AMI or marks, and non-marks, which are considered affordable for those over 80% AMI. And for this study, most of these units are marks and condos. This map shows multifamily and townhouse units developed by right in the planning districts, which are areas covered by adopted sector or area plans. The dots represent the number of units by census block. Maps broken out by unit type are provided in the memo for more detail. These units are distributed throughout the county along Columbia Pike and Langston Boulevard, with clusters located in areas including Arlington, Arlington Village, Gleewood, Halls Hill, Highview Park, Buckingham, Pentagon City, and other apartment and townhouse communities throughout the county. This map also shows census tracts with a greater percent of persons of color, housing cost burdened, or both than the county average for equity considerations, which I will talk about. So over half of these districts are located in planning districts. Staff determined whether allowing greater flexibility for by right change is consistent with or supportive of county policies for existing housing stock, or if certain sector or area plans have their own expectations and regulatory tools to support renovations where these units are located. We found that units located in planning districts are subject to a range of different planning policies and zoning regulations. Districts including the Green Valley Special Revitalization District, the East Falls Church Neighborhood Center District, and the Clarendon Revitalization District have a limited number of units in RA and R27 districts, and also have limited planning guidance and no special zoning tools for preservation of existing multifamily and townhouse units. The Radnor Heights East Planning District and Columbia Pike Special Revitalization District include a moderate number of multifamily and townhouse units in RA districts. In these districts, plan goals and policies are primarily focused on the height, form, and design of new construction. These plans do not include guidance for renovation or alteration of existing units. The Fort Myers Heights North Planning District includes areas of existing multifamily buildings where redevelopment is promoted, as well as conservation areas where redevelopment is not supported. However, there are no specific policies or tools to facilitate renovation or alteration of existing units in the conservation areas. The housing conservation district areas were established to preserve affordability in multifamily residential neighborhoods outside of areas with adopted plan goals that have retained a supply of market rate affordable units. One of the goals of the HCD is to encourage the retention and renovation of existing rental affordable housing units. While townhouses are no longer allowed by right in HCD areas, other policies and tools to encourage retention and renovation have not yet been developed. The Langston Boulevard Planning District, Pentagon City Coordinated Redevelopment District, and the Columbia Pike Neighborhood Special Revitalization District have a significant number of multifamily marks and townhouse units, as well as detailed policies and implementation strategies to realize affordability and other goals, including an increased number of housing units overall. This flexibility for structural renovations would support homeowner reinvestment and multifamily rental property reinvestment, as in other areas, until such a time that redevelopment can occur and plan goals, including for committed affordable units, may be realized. Through our analysis, a number of important racial equity considerations emerged. As was shown in the planning district map earlier, 51% of these dwellings are located in census tracts with a greater percent of persons of color than the county average of 41%. 17% are located in census tracts with a greater percent of households that are considered housing cost burdened, meaning that more than 30% of their monthly income on average is spent on housing costs, than the county average of 37%. Additionally, these dwellings make up 26% of CAPS and 55% of marks countywide. With these considerations in mind, we asked who benefits and who is burdened to understand potential impacts of the proposed recommendations through a racial equity lens. Homeowners could benefit from increased flexibility to invest in their properties, build wealth, and accommodate household needs. Renters, especially those with fewer financial resources, could be burdened by risk of increased rental rates and displacement, but they could also benefit from improved living conditions. Ultimately, were you about to chime in? Oh, sorry. Oh. Ultimately, these risks already exist under the status quo, and any renovation project, whether including structural alterations or not, may lead to increased rental rates and displacement. The ongoing multifamily reinvestment study is examining the county's multifamily housing stock, including the existing options for and barriers to reinvestment in older multifamily properties. This item was brought forward in advance of MRS recommendations due to the significant volume of BZA variance requests to provide near-term relief. So zoning text amendments are being proposed in two different sections of the zoning ordinance. The first is in 16.2.3.b regarding interior repairs and alterations of non-conforming buildings and structures. The text bolded and underlined adds to this article that existing non-conforming townhouses and multifamily dwellings in the R27 and RA district shall be permitted to make interior repairs and alterations, whether structural or non-structural, provided the repair or alteration is wholly contained within the existing walls of the dwelling, building, or structure, which would create alignment with 1 and 2 family dwellings and accessory buildings and structures. The other proposed zoning text amendment is the addition of 16.2.4.b.3 regarding exceptions. 16.2.4.a indicates that a non-conforming building or structure shall not be added to or expanded in any manner unless such building or structure, including such additions and expansions, is made to conform to all regulations of the district in which it is located. With this zoning text amendment, these provisions do not apply to existing non-conforming townhouse or multifamily dwellings located in the R27 and RA districts, only for the purposes of adding or expanding window wells, areaways, decks, ramps, and steps, provided such addition or expansion conforms to all regulations of the district in which it is located. So in conclusion, a zoning ordinance amendment is appropriate to enable interior structural alterations and limited additions for creation of window wells for basement egress, areaways, exterior stairs, ramps, decks, in non-conforming townhouses and multifamily buildings in RA districts and the R27 district. Exterior structural alterations, which include replacing doors and windows that perpetuate a nonconformity, would still require a BZA variance. This zoning ordinance amendment would allow for consistency with 1 and 2 family dwellings and EHOs and would provide flexibility for improvements that would benefit existing and new residents. And this is our anticipated schedule. On Thursday, we are holding a lunch and learn information session virtually from 12 to 1 p.m. Following this information session, an online feedback form will be available through August. And in September, we are planning to brief the Housing Commission and Tenant Landlord Commission, as well as receive RTA authorization from the county board. And October will include Planning Commission and County Board final considerations and recommendations.
Thank you. So next up, I believe now that we've had the presentation, I think we're up for questions from the Planning Commission and members. The co-table here.
Question. So on one of the slides, it alludes to there's a conflict with culture, some cultural and historic things. So with this, does this override historic, or does historic still stand? What's that?
If you want to take a stab at that. Okay. I mean, I don't think we're necessarily talking about places that are like on the historic register, but
Well, my house is honorifically historic, but it's not in one of these districts, but,
Right.
and we can do anything to it we want.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah, just in the example of like with Fairlington, you know, most of those would be considered historic, and giving them the ability to make these alterations would prolong the life of that building instead of encouraging redevelopment. So,
So the answer is basically, yes, it would override if there's some historic thing that they're supposed to follow.
But if a property is located within a historic district, as by for the zoning ordinance, then those provisions need to be responded to if there's any sort of change proposed to those properties.
Okay, that,
This is something that would allow for expansions, limited expansions like stairs, area ways, but you would still need to be consistent if you were located within a historic district. I guess that would apply to places like Colonial Village, right? And then, but yeah, as I said before, the provisions of that historic.
so you still work within what the provisions are for that. I do have one other question. So, yeah, my first, and your slide alluded to it, somebody makes improvements, how do you prevent the rent going up? Is there any way to do that at all?
Right, so that is one of the
Because that's what we're seeing here, so.
issues, right, that we've identified. And cons here that these properties can make renovations today as long as they're not structural, right? And in any of those kinds of circumstances, the rents could possibly increase. Those that live there today may not, be able to continue living there. So that is a challenge that we face. And we are, looking at that issue through a lot of different initiatives. Place support renters with rental assistance. So this is a change that allows for some additional flexibility for renovations. In the case of Fairlington, it's like taking out a wall to create a more expanded kitchen. But in a multifamily property, it could allow for a property owner to underpin the foundation of a property, which right now they would need to go to the board for use permit or to BZA. So it's really creating some flexibility to prolong the life of those buildings. And yes, that could lead to some increases in rents, but it is prolonging the life of those units for those residents that would still live there and potentially be residents.
So we're looking at ways to possibly figure out how we can avoid these rent increases. But in the meantime, are we allowing enough flexibility to add to more of the potential rent increases? I guess that's my balance.
Can you
Check.
check the question again? Are we doing?
Well, I think you said that you are looking at ways down the road to figure out how to prevent with these things rental increases.
Well, I don't know if we will ever be able to prevent.
I get that.
Property owners from raising their rents, but we are continuously looking at ways to support,
The initiatives, I guess that's what I'm saying,
Right.
that you're looking at
Creation of more
initiatives. Right.
portable units, rental assistance programs and expanding those types of programs.
But so in the meantime, when we add this flexibility and we don't have these initiatives in place, do we then see like runaway of rental increases? That would be my concern if we've made it easier.
We don't anticipate that. We think that it, property owners are gonna make a decision to invest in their property because they have come to a point of concluding like they really need to make some changes, and that would go along with it is potentially some rental rate increases. We don't think that allowing for this opportunity for structural interior alterations in multifamily properties is going to necessarily tip the scale in all circumstances, but it might allow for a property owner to make more meaningful improvements than they would have been able to, such as ADA access.
Thank you.
It would also mean things like electrical upgrades, plumbing upgrades, a lot of the buildings, because I've talked to some multifamily owners and their buildings are at the end of their useful life and they need massive investments, and that's interior, so it could be done then by this, rather than going through, and as Kelly said, it extends the life of these buildings, which isn't mentioned here, but it's an environmental benefit because there's a lot of embedded energy in these buildings that we don't have to tear them down. We can just do upgrades or not even upgrades, it's making it up to spec. That furthers another goal of our comprehensive plan. So, it's, as Kelly said, you're balancing things here all around.
To see if there are places that are being significant renovation or upgrade takes place, how much the rent goes up. Is that possible?
We monitor the supply of market rate affordable units in the county. That's something that our housing staff monitors closely. So that would be, yes, definitely something we're looking at that.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is great because we've taken some steps on this a few years ago for houses and duplexes. I remember going through those, and it was like for the non-conforming houses, that this was really a good thing. It had a lot of equity benefits in it, a lot of simplification for everybody, and there were really very few downsides to it. So this is something that I think we even flagged back then that, well, what about all these other properties there? So I'm really happy to see this, and I'm really glad we're not waiting for the full final study for the, what are they called?
Multifamily.
Right,
Yes.
because that's a big deal, but that's going to take a while. And I understand that. I don't have a problem with that. But this is a great interim step. Part of it looks as though we're really just making county ADA compliant, because how could we say no to a handicap ramp? I don't think we could. I think the county would be vulnerable if we denied something like that. And then to Nia's point about the historic, that's one thing that I don't understand is Fairlington is pretty cool thing. I remember years ago when it went condo, it was like these were entry-level ownership units. They were really, really nicely done and everything. And they're sort of, you really can't expand them too much because they're all together. But they're all non-conforming under our zoning ordinance. Is that true?
Yeah, I don't know if I know as much as you do about it, but yeah, just as the zoning district change, they don't fit mostly setback requirements. Is that what it is?
The buildings are located too close to one another per standards.
But
And
they're
also
okay for the fire code, right?
We're not talking about.
This is just
Building
a
code
choice
issues.
rather than if.
When the properties in Fairlington were built, they were built where there weren't a strict requirements for distance between buildings, not related to the fire code. It was just
Just a choice.
just over time, we changed those standards, and also setbacks from streets. So a lot of the buildings are now non-conforming related to setbacks from streets and building separation.
Okay, what I would like to see, and not part of this, because I think this is appropriate the way it is. But down the road, where we're doing this further study, is Fairlington, the zoning ordinance has to change to make Fairlington completely normal. That it's not non-conforming. It's crazy that that was made to be non-conforming. It's an amazing community. The architecture is wonderful. The place, everything about it is like what we want. And to consider that non-conforming means the zoning code is wrong, not the built environment. And I can only speculate as to what was going on, when the zoning ordinance was created to make these huge number of units non-conforming. And we saw that with the last go around with the single families, that a lot of them are on small lots. And it was pretty clear what was going on, that the minority communities, almost all their properties were made non-conforming. And it was clearly a very deliberate thing back when the zoning ordinance was put into place back in the 30s, 40s, early 50s. I'm almost afraid that's what happened with Maryland for some reason. I don't know that's true, but it seems to get caught up in that whole thing. So I would really strongly want to recommend that we look at our zoning ordinance to see why do we have so many non-conforming. It's, you know, it's fine when you have one or two here and there, but when you have an entire community, that's wrong. That's simply wrong. And that's not the building's problem. It's our zoning ordinance problem. Anyway, that's my rant for the night. Sorry.
Only one?
So noted, also noted.
Very good.
Hi, have you guys, have other counties done something similar, and what were the effects when this actually went through? Like, do we have other lessons learned from other?
We haven't looked at other examples. We have precedent though here in terms of how we treat, as Jim was referring to, how we treat single detached and duplexes. Many of them are non-conforming based on changes over time to the zoning ordinance that made it more restrictive. And we allow interior alterations in those instances as well as expansions and additions. So we're really applying what our policy is for those typologies to these typologies. Now, I will say, I just happen to know that there are jurisdictions that have in rewriting their zoning ordinances, which is not something we're contemplating. They have introduced a lot of provisions to support changes to non-conforming properties so that they can remain a part of the older housing stock of the community.
I think, I mean, this is a really interesting sort of initiative, but I can't help but wonder, I mean, sort of like the unintended sort of market effects of this. You know, Nia, Commissioner Bagley was mentioning about, you know, rental controls and how could we, and also I worry whether it would make properties even higher value, right? Because now you can rent the bottom and you have, you know, and so it's going to make price values also go higher. And in fact, I'm just wondering, I guess I'm just afraid of sort of like unintended consequences of something that is good. We do want, you know, structures to be ADA compliant. We do want all of these things, but what are some of the bigger market effects that this could potentially have down the road?
I think that's a good comment. I think it's something that we've identified as a concern as well. I think our recommendations, though, acknowledge the importance of retaining this housing stock and creating flexibility for improvements to the properties so they don't deteriorate. So we're balancing, you know, different issues and different concerns, and feel at the end of the day, this is a way of allowing for property owners to reinvest in their properties, for homeowners to make improvements that allow them to continue living in those properties rather than leave the county or, you know, need to find somewhere else to live. So we're just having to balance a lot of different issues here. And at the end of the day, this creates flexibility for property owners to make changes to their property that today would be very difficult for them to make.
That actually happened with the single families too, because a lot of those actually are rentals. You have a surprising number of single family rental properties, and those are now by right for the improvement. So the risks you're talking about are happening right now with the same family duplexes. So I think Kelly's right. It is really a problem. You've identified something that's an ongoing, but I think probably have to be more creative in trying to figure ways to stabilize not even so much property values, but even that too, because the county increases its tax assessments when you improve your property too.
Right.
You know, so this.
It's like wealth transfer.
Right.
Anyway,
Yeah, I know.
Go in the rabbit hole.
You know, this is an enormous issue that isn't going to get solved by this.
Right.
I say you had a comment as well.
Oh, no, I didn't. I just here to listen, and familiarize myself with
Gotcha.
your proceedings. And hopefully we come back again. Thank you though for having us.
I do have a question. Arlington straddles, the border, so part of it's in Alexandria, isn't it? Or am I thinking of a different,
I don't think so.
it's completely in Arlington?
Yes.
So I thought there were some
Yeah.
units that went over the border.
I feel pretty confident that Fairleigh is complete.
Within Arlington,
Yeah.
okay.
I mean, it's on the other side of.
Right, I know
395,
that.
but
but yeah.
that's still part of
I know, everybody
Right.
forgets that's part of
Yeah.
Arlington.
Oh. We can confirm that. We can review and confirm.
Yeah, because there are some part of it that's in Alexander. How do they treat zoning? You know, or, because it'd be odd if it's non-conforming on this side of the border, but it's completely fine on the other side of the border.
Yeah. I want to recognize myself and kind of thinking through these, sort of like unintended consequences. So if the logic here, like take like a garden apartment somewhere in Fort Myers Heights that's like 70 years old, do improvements internally, like say the plumbing, something like that. So the idea is that the property developer does those improvements, maintains the original structure, but it's just newer and nicer on the inside. So maybe rents increase a little bit as opposed to the building's falling into a state of disrepair after it reaches the end of its useful life. It gets bought out, torn down, and then redeveloped into luxury apartments that no one in that building could afford. That kind of the
That could happen too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's it.
the logic.
That has happened
Yeah,
in other places in the county, so that's a good scenario to consider.
yeah. So that's something I'm kind of thinking through. Like that's kind of the trade-off. It's like yes, it might increase a little bit here, but it would be better than losing the entire sort of middle income kind of housing. So that's a thought I have.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. Because
Yeah.
on the north end of Lion Village, there was this one small apartment,
Mhm.
which it was built like in the late 30s, early 40s. And it doesn't look like anybody put any money in it since then.
Right.
And then all of a sudden, like 3 years ago, it closed down and they put in all new windows, painted doors. I mean, the whole thing, and then a big sign went up for luxury units.
Right.
But they're still the same interior, so they're
Right.
really not luxury. So
Right.
the rents are not gonna be for the towers in Clarendon.
Right.
So you're right, the rents no doubt went up, but they're nowhere near what the rents are in Clarendon or Roslyn.
Mhm. Where they were just two buildings
Right.
altogether. Yeah, and that's
That's a really, yeah, because I've seen that.
yeah.
But the truth could also be in the other way too, right? Like the improvements are done. Yes, you can, keep the building, but then they just change the furnishings and it becomes a luxury building that could
Right.
be affordable, before.
That could have happened even without this,
Right.
and it does.
No, and that's a good point though, because you
Yeah.
could really do it and make a nice kitchen and then just
Right.
jack everything up. But yeah, I think we've covered that. Are there any other topics related to this item? Anyone here? I see a hand raise online.
Oh, that's a picture. Oh, that is a hand raise, you're right.
Commissioner Steiner, usually the zoning committee has its public comment at the end of the
Oh, so
meeting.
public comment.
So I'm happy to work with, it's your meeting. So if you want to entertain public comment on this item now, you're happy to do so. Traditionally, ZOCO has
Yeah,
its
we can leave it
comment
at the
at the end.
Yeah, we can leave it at the end. I just thought they might have been part of staff.
The report is really long, but really in-depth, so hats off. It was like, this is an amazing amount of work you did on this, but I'm
Yeah.
fully in support of it.
Yeah,
It's a good team effort.
Yeah, I was hoping
We
that
had
it'd be
all
more
of
than
us.
one person
Yeah.
that write
Yeah,
it.
It's all involved. And I will say, just for the record,
Yes.
there is a part of Arlington and Alexandria, so stay corrected there. And we can look into how they treat the properties there.
Yeah.
That is an interesting question.
Because I knew somebody who had bought there
Oh, okay.
yeah.
when they first went condo.
Okay.
Okay, so if that's all for our, last call for anything on this topic? Nothing here. I think we're done with that, so we can move on to the second item here, which would be the recovery residences. Thank you all very much for your presentation.
Number two.
We got recovery residences.
Oh, right, got it.
That I believe is going to be presenting on that. Well, you are getting out of here early.
Kids can't complain too.
Yeah, have a good rest of your night.
So, this is a zoning text amendment. Actually, I'm sorry, it's presently advertised for a zoning text amendment to introduce a new residential use in the zoning ordinance, known as recovery residences. So these.
There we go.
Sorry about that. So this is a presentation, or I'm sorry, this is a zoning text amendment to introduce this residential use known as recovery residences. So these are essentially drug and alcohol-free housing for persons who have substance abuse disorders, and they provide a congregate supportive, sober living environment for these. They generally self-sufficient households. They are located in single-family neighborhoods, and typically they're located in rental dwellings. These recovery residences are identified in the Code of Virginia as a housing facility that is certified by the Virginia Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Services to provide alcohol-free and drug-free housing for individuals with substance abuse disorders and individuals with co-occurring mental illnesses. And so these are essentially, these are like really just housing for persons who are trying to maintain a sober lifestyle to, in service of maintaining sobriety and their recovery. These are not halfway houses or shelters or other kind of substance abuse treatment centers. They are not really, I mean, they don't provide any care or anything. So this is again just really just housing for persons who are trying to maintain
The living.
So, as I mentioned, the zoning ordinance currently is silent on recovery residences. The closest cognate we have in the zoning ordinance would be residential facilities for individuals who are have developmental disabilities or have mental illnesses and so forth. However, this is not an exact fit because these residential facilities, there are operated and managed by community service organizations, whereas these recovery residences are not. They are independently operated and managed by the residents who reside there. These residential facilities also provide care and assistance with the activities of daily living for the residents who live there. Again, recovery residences do not provide that type of care on premise. There's professional staff either residing at or attached to these residential facilities for developmentally disabled individuals to provide this care and to also manage the property. Again, recovery residences do not provide any staff attached. Again, they manage and they're self-sufficient residences. And lastly, the residential facilities are licensed by the Virginia Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Services, whereas recovery residences are not licensed. However, they are certified by a certifying entity, which is basically sets up has a certification program that follows in the Code of Virginia that basically it ensures that these residences are operating under some kind of program that is maintaining sobriety, that they're functioning, operating as a recovery residence as provided for in the code. So the provisions we're proposing right now include we'll be creating a new definition for recovery residences, which it's a little small up there, but basically it's identifying the use so that we just need to identify the use in the zoning ordinance because it's not identified currently. I suppose the main feature of the definition is that it specifies that these need to be certified under the Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Services. That's kind of a key component of that. We're also making some modifications to our residential use categories for household living and group living. This is mainly to make it clear that this is a residential use, not some kind of other so forth. We are making modifications to the principal use tables. This is the mechanism that basically allows the use in various zoning districts. The use is going to be allowed in any zoning district that allows one family detached dwellings. And lastly, there is going to be a use standard for these recovery residences. Again, the use standards there, I apologize, it's kind of small, but the use standard essentially stipulates that recovery residences are limited to no more than 8 residents, and they need to be located in a one-family dwelling. And if they choose to have more than 8 residents, or if they would like to locate in a duplex or a multifamily townhouse, they would need to go to the county board to get approval of a special exception use permit. And so this is the schedule going forward. We've also reached out to the Disabilities Advisory Committee due to the fact that, well, I guess I should also mention that. So the circumstances surrounding like this text amendment and why it's moving forward is that zoning administrator has received a reasonable accommodation request under the Federal Fair Housing Act from Oxford House Incorporated, which is a credentialing agency for these recovery residences. And essentially, they asked to have a recovery residence with 8 residents located in a one-family dwelling. So they asked that we treat them as we would treat a single-family resident. So again, like this is kind of the reason why we are taking this forward is to be compliant with the Federal Fair Housing Act. And yeah, so again, this is and part of the reasonable accommodation request was a notation that under the Federal Fair Housing Act, persons who are substance abuse disorders are considered disabled under the Federal Fair Housing Act based on amendments that were made in 1988. So again, this is kind of there is some obligation for the county to take action, at least for to meet the Federal Fair Housing Act. So and so again, this is why we kind of refer this for comments, and if they have any, we haven't heard back from them yet. It's just sent to them by 10. So, and that's all I have. I don't know.
Mr. Chair, we did receive some public comment through our ZOCO comment form. I did provide that through the clerk to the entirety of the planning commission. We do plan to post those comments on the ZOCO page so that for purposes of transparency and sharing those comments with other members of the public who may be interested. And I forgot to acknowledge that we did have a comment on the previous item on your agenda. We'll be doing the same for that as well. So
Perfect.
So I'm happy to answer any questions.
That's exactly what's next. So any questions on this item
I
here?
did think that there was probably some potential legal violation that
Mhm.
unless we did this, we really need to. bring ourselves in. I fully support that. The only thing that really, reading through the background materials, the only thing that struck me is the definition of family, how we limit it to 4 people, unrelated people per dwelling unit, which is almost unenforceable because they gotta go in and find out, it's really pretty odd that we still have that. Or, zoning ordinance, but that was just one thing that's sort of I've always wondered about how whether even ultimately it's legal. I know there's a lot of case law that does say, yeah, you can do it, but it's never really been fully tested all the way.
So again, this is part of like why we're kind of specifically calling out recovery residents as specific use instead of changes to our definition of family or because it's again, like this doesn't have like a robust policy study behind it. It's more of a
But let's narrowly target what the problem is and address that narrow thing. So I support that.
Yeah. So again, it may seem like a lot of additional provisions for the zoning ordinance, but that was done to kind of keeping in mind that there is this larger policy question as far as like the number of individuals that are permitted in a household, definition of family, and all those things. Which are
So one of the things that came to mind and looking at, which is not related to any of this, so I don't even think you have an answer, but if somebody owns a house, a single person, and they decide to take in foster children, are they then limited to only 3 foster children because no one's related potentially?
I mean,
could they have that 4th child if the 4 kids are not siblings?
I mean, I think, well, I mean, the one definition for family is an individual or 2 or more people who are related by blood, marriage, or adoption. So I think there may be.
It's not adopted.
Right,
Children are not adopted.
So yeah, that would be.
What if somebody took in a child, like if
Yeah.
the godfather?
So if 4 people are related
Yeah.
by blood marriage and they bring a 5th in who's unrelated,
Whatever it means. Yeah.
just that's why I've always had real problems with the whole definition of family.
Yeah.
It really troubles me because it assumes a family is one thing. And this county has so many different types of families at this point. People who cohabit, who are for very good reasons. And it's basically none of our business either. But it's in the law there. So anyway, that's not related to this, but it's something that triggered my thinking going through it.
I have a couple questions, but first, to your point, in real estate, we're not allowed to say family anymore because it's a fair housing violation.
Yeah, and I get, and yeah,
Because it is to, it's not
Right.
traditional. I have a couple of questions. So certification that's done initially, and then is it done yearly, or how does that work?
So it's done initially, and basically the certification is certifying. So when people reside at these recovered residences, what happens is they are entering an agreement, and the agreement is to follow the program that, in this case, Oxford House, but whatever the credentialing agency has, they develop and certify that these homes are running, in accordance with, like the sober living, like
So
what.
is there like a check-in or a checkup time yearly? Or is it,
I do not know that. I can figure it out.
would it be helpful to hear that
Yeah.
down the road?
Um,
And also, so what's the process? So if somebody in their neighborhood decides that they, which I think recovery residences are great, to have them, to make them available, especially given the crisis that we are facing, mental illness and everything. But so if I want to take my house and I decide that I want to apply or do this, is there neighborhood involvement? Is there, what is the process, just out of curiosity, that somebody would go
for
through?
the certification,
Yes,
I believe you would need to go through, again, one of the certifying entities, which are generally, again, like Oxford House is one of these organizations. And again, they,
so it's the organization that certifies it, the county just allows it.
yes, that's how, I mean,
Okay.
so, well, I mean, for 8 or less in the family, again, it would be a by right use. So, we wouldn't be imposing any additional, like,
So would there be any notices in the neighborhood put up, or by the way this is happening, even if it's by right? I'm just
if
curious.
it's by right, no. If it is by use permit,
Right.
then it would standard procedure. Again, it would be something that have to go to a public hearing to the county.
Gotcha. And then back to one of the comments that 8 people in a house, 2 or 3 bedrooms. I mean,
So there are provisions in the Code of Virginia that, as far as the certification process, that does specify that the number of residents it is, in order for the house to be certified for.
so there is a number to.
Right, and it follows the bill,
Yeah.
Virginia statewide uniform building
Good.
code, which basically says,
Perfect.
in order for a bedroom to, in order for a room to be a bedroom, accommodate a person. Having more than a person in that bedroom, you need 50 square feet per person. So so there is,
There is a guide.
there is, yeah, there are some controls over so that it's, you don't have like a room full of.
Question, what is the composition? So are these families who would live there, or these are sort of adults?
These are unrelated individuals. So
Okay,
um,
got it. Right.
currently under the zoning ordinance, we allow for households of up to 4 unrelated individuals to live together in a home. And that's one of the definitions we have for family. The other 2 we have are for residential facilities with 8 or less again, unrelated persons who have developmental disabilities that, again, licensed by Virginia Behavioral Health.
So children wouldn't be living here.
No, like these are people. So these are people who are living here. They are self-selecting to live there. They're not, court mandated a halfway house or that. So they have rent, and again, this rent is not to they have to pay. They have a lease with the property owner, the landlord. They're the ones who so again, like this is kind of like this isn't subsidized housing in any shape. So like Oxford House or some other community service agency is not like managing this, and like they're responsible for like just any other household. They pay utilities, they pay rent, so forth. And yeah, so I don't know if that's.
Yeah, no, I think that's why actually it would be great to get the information that Commissioner Bagley mentioned about, well, do you have to recertify to make sure that
Yeah, I can.
this is consistently happening? And then the other, how does this, I know, here it says in addition proposed standard, you need a special exception permit if you wanted to have more than 8 residences at the house, so duplexes and townhouse dwellings. How would this sort of play out in terms of like with EHO? Would that mean that you could have 16 people if it's a duplex? So 8 and 8,
So
or for triplets, would it be 24?
So this would be per dwelling unit. So like, so if you have a duplex, if you wanted to, so you could, again, by right, go up to 8. Well, no, actually, I'm sorry. Well, yeah, you could have any number in there. You would just need to use you need a use permit from the county in order to have it a duplex or anything that's not a one family dwelling. And then again, like it's the dwelling unit, it's follows the same rules for family. You could have one, like an individual or 2 or more people related by blood or marriage or adoption, up to 4 individuals who are unrelated. So that's how that fits in. And this would be similar. This would be it's not the type of family, at least like that's not how we're couching it, but it would be treated in the same way in that you would, if you wanted to go into a duplex, like, well, you'd have to get approval for both duplexes. So because this is like the use that's going in there. It's instead of a family, it's the
Right.
residence.
Yeah, I guess that's what I was essentially trying to ask is then technically you could have, if you got a permit, the duplexes, and then at each one, or you could have 8, or is it that 8 is counted across the duplex? I guess that's what I'm asking.
Would it be that building code piece with it?
It would be per dwelling unit. So a duplex that has 2 dwelling units, you could have up to 8 in each. So it would be 16. But again, because it's in a duplex and not a one family dwelling, like the only option you would have to do even up to 8 would be to get a use permit. And so, I mean, again, you could go more than 8, but again, like that would be kind of like the yeah, like so, like the by right option of up to 8 in a one family dwelling. This kind of parallels how we currently handle these residential facilities for developmentally disabled. There's also a provision in there for assisted living facilities up to 8 aged, infirm, disabled person. So like this is kind of paralleling that process. And then as far as the to go more than 8 and or to locate in a different type than a one family dwelling, like this is more just like granting some flexibility in locating these. And this does, so the provisions in the Code of Virginia that allow for recovery residences, they were just adopted in 2019. So this is kind of like a newer type of housing. So there's not many peer jurisdictions in the Commonwealth. The only one I found was for the city of Harrisonburg, and they have these recovery residences. They kind of follow a similar path. They're allowed 8 by right, and if you want to go more than 8, you need to go a use permit, preferred use permit route. So, and then they don't really stipulate whether or not they need to be in one family or whatever. They just say a dwelling. So, but yeah, so that's kind of, I don't know if that's.
No, I was just curious.
Okay.
I'm thinking possibilities and seeing or worse with
The only question I have, so there's no organization that holds the master lease to the house. It's a lease with one or more of the residents between the landlord and those residents, rather than an organization holding the lease and then collecting rent from the residents.
Yes, I mean, I think they're. So, and this is according to Oxford House. It's rented by a group of individuals. The lease is between the landlord and the unincorporated association. And I believe Oxford House serves as a mediator to kind of like help people who are seeking.
So they they get people together, identify a house and act as a go-between to facilitate it.
Correct.
Okay.
So yeah, their primary function is to ensure that this is in fact operating.
And if they just go in the house, as of today, we wouldn't even know it because it would be completely within the zoning ordinance for unrelated people with a lease.
Correct.
With a
So
landlord. We'd never know.
So there are already 6 of these recovery residences in Arlington. And I was doing some digging on Oxford House's websites. And, so what they do is they list property, like, the address. They say, the number of, the max, the number of residents that they can accommodate. So most of them are 8. There's, I think there's one that's 7, each one's 9. But then they also list like the vacancies they have in that particular property. So most of these have like 4 or 5 vacancies. So again, until they go more than 4 people, they are technically compliant as a.
Okay, no, I just wanted to figure out how the mechanics work. That's all.
Yeah, those are kind of some of my questions I have on that too. It's like, so anyone who just owns a property, owns a single family home in Arlington, do it. It's not, no organization owns these or anything like that. It's just, like Commissioner Bagley said, she just decides one day she wants to do this and she can do it. It's that simple.
Yeah, I mean, like, again, you would need to obviously work through some kind of certifying agency.
Right, get the
to,
certifications, right.
to do that. But yeah, I mean, I don't think there would be
Okay.
any prohibition against that.
That's my question. I was interested in the mechanics piece as well. Did anyone have any other?
I got one other.
Yes.
So for a property owner who decides to do this, are there tax benefits to them to do this?
Not to my knowledge.
I was curious, might be an incentive for somebody
Yeah.
to do more of it. I don't know.
And then my last clarifying question, just to make sure I'm understanding this right. There's no on-hand staff. There's no programming. There's no care that's being done. It's just
Deliver.
8 people living together who have either sought treatment, have already received it, or have decided to live a sober lifestyle and will not be partaking in extracurriculars, shall we say. That's correct. Okay.
Yeah. And so again, if they, these residents all sign agreements and they're kind of self-policed, or, so for instance, if there are relapses, they can potentially lose their certification.
Sure.
And know that there's been relapses and report it to kind of like your credentialing agency. In this case, would be Oxford House. They could lose their certification, which means they are no longer residents.
Right.
They would need to cease and desist. so to
Right.
speak.
Right. And then just the one last thing, and then that those who move into these residences, you said they're self-sufficient, so they pay rent, that kind of thing. So they're, gotcha. So they're employed, all those kinds of things.
Yeah.
Or earning some kind of income. So
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah. Or yes.
Got it. Okay, so I thought that might be good just to clarify. But that's all I had. Any other final? Okay, awesome.
Mr. Chair, Cliff and I, given some of the nature of some of the comments, we were sort of coordinating on how best to sort of present this item to you tonight. So I have a bit of an accounting. It seems like some of the items that the commission may look to find some resourcing on in a future staff report would be, for example, the frequency of the certification, how the recertification process works. Is it an annual process? Is it a one and done, for example? Any sort of monitoring that goes into that? I heard a lot of questions tonight about what would be the process for establishing a recovery residence. So informing the commission a little bit more in that regard. I think Mr. Hogan talked about some of this, about the number of bedrooms, how there's conformance requirements with the the building code, but, you know, if there's anything more on that, that could be something that we optimize, provide in a future staff report. I know, you know, Commissioner Lantz, you talked a lot about that definition of family, and the Commissioner Guevara was talking about the adults and things as well. So, and we confirmed that it's just unrelated persons. Again, there was the topic about how does this interface with our expanded housing option ordinance, and so again, we can revisit and see if there's anything else on that front. But I think we fairly covered that in this meeting. And then there was the master lease, the tax benefits, and then the confirmation that there isn't, you know, residential staff programming or care that's provided. Is there anything else that perhaps wasn't covered in that recap that would be beneficial for the commission to understand as you're moving forward? Okay. All right, great. Thank you for allowing me to humor you all.
Yes. So I think that is everything for item number 2. Thank you, Cliff. And I move on to item number 3, Crystal City building complaints.
It's gonna be mine. Good evening, everybody.
He's in the flesh now.
Yeah. They were down
Sitting
upstairs.
Yeah.
Oh, fantastic. Let's see if I can share my screen.
Different meeting.
Matt, if you have trouble, I'm happy to share for you, but I'm sure you can probably get it too.
The mouse was super active. There. So this is what we consider minor, but also technical amendment that we've proposed for the zoning ordinance involving the CO Crystal City zoning district, and specifically the building height measurements that applies throughout that district. So what we wanted to do is cover kind of the origins of why we're discussing this, what we're trying to solve for, and the way in which we're trying to solve it, and get your feedback before we do some further analysis this summer and look to bring this back in the fall. So with that, we're going to cover, again, the reason this is being proposed and give you a highlight of the next steps looking at that schedule. So what we wanted to start with is the policy guidance overview as it relates to the Crystal City Sector Plan, starting with the 2010 adoption of that document, which led to updates to the General Land Use Plan, which captured the Coordinated Redevelopment District boundary, Glove Note number 1, and many different public space symbols and street network elements. And this map is helpful because it does highlight the boundary between what we in the planning environment consider the change between Crystal City and Pentagon City. I know there's a perception that Richmond Highway or Route 1 is that delineator, but it's actually East Street, and in some cases Fern Street. So it does have, you can see here, the less difficult online, but the red line here kind of gives you that separation all the way from Army Navy Drive through Virginia Highlands Park. So that's kind of what we consider in our planning documents, consider the change there. So what we're discussing tonight is really that western edge of the Crystal City side of the equation along Fern Street, and something that's been highlighted to us with an active application. Looking at an existing, or in this case, dated aerial, you can see here a couple key buildings missing, but this is what that transition looks like. So on the right side of the image, you have medium to high-rise buildings along Richmond Highway, constituting existing and recently completed Crystal City development. And as you kind of make your way to the left, The northern part, you can see elements of Pentagon City. And to the south, the Oral Highlands Civic Association neighborhood. And this is really the area we're going to be focusing on between Fern and East Street, all the way between 15th Street and 22nd Street. We have two pretty large properties, two large blocks, somewhat unique from the rest of the Crystal City zoning district. So as we look at the actual sector plan and zooming into that western portion, the way in which it begins to depict some hypothetical scenarios in which development could occur for these large blocks, which already have, as you've just seen, mid-rise buildings. It was envisioning infill development, generally wrapping the perimeter of those blocks as those existing buildings would remain. So looking at an infill, likely phase development approach that would create likely smaller buildings on an otherwise large property. And this was different from many of the other sites, which usually involve either wholesale change or a much smaller in footprint in terms of the overall site area that's involved. So that same portion of the Crystal City District, if we're looking at the heights map, indicating what is permitted in terms of building heights, did codify kind of a gradual transition away from the concentration of density, which was generally Richmond Highway and Crystal Drive, particularly near 18th and 23rd Streets. And as you go further west, you can see the gradual rainbow of colors transitioning, from 300 to 200, 150, 110, so on and so forth, until we get to the very western edge of the property, where the final strip indicating building heights is codified at 35 feet. This map, initially proposed in the sector plan, is one of the several maps that also was codified in the CO Crystal City zoning district, along with our land uses, base density maps, tower coverage, bulk plane angles, and I think one or two other ones. So what we're looking at is really that western strip highlighted here in the green that speaks to how those final two blocks between 15th and 20th, 22nd are intended to transition. And specifically, how do we measure height when proposals are coming in on those two blocks? You can see here, although the color is a little bit faded, that in addition to specifying how tall the buildings can be, the depth at which that height restriction applies is also specified. Not for every height range, but certainly for the 35-foot zone on that western edge. So in staff's assessment, what we've looked at is how does the existing topography and the various changes that occur in that area meet and comply with, work with those height restrictions. And what we've come to understand with the benefit of some active applications is that at the intersection of 18th and Fern Street, there's actually significant grade change that happens on both sides of that intersection. So the two corners of Crystal Towers and Crystal Houses, highlighted here in purple, right? You can see here how as they approach 18th Street, there are significant grade changes that begin to have kind of a domino effect on what happens in terms of height. And specifically, when you look at the existing conditions, this gives you a better perspective of just the existing parking and building layout, how they approach that intersection. You significantly have a drop, kind of a depression vertically of that site as it approaches the elevated sidewalk, which begins to have impacts on the rest of the property. When we look at Crystal Houses, and this is kind of the one example we're going to use to demonstrate the point we're trying to make. It is under one single ownership, and in 2019 came in for a larger site plan proposal. And in that case, as envisioned by the sector plan, two primary buildings that were already there in place were remaining, and the infill development highlighted with those different CH numbers that you see here was proposed on the perimeter of the property. While all of that was compliant with the height prescriptions in the sector plan, what it also accomplished was a single average site elevation calculation for the entire property. And from that one calculation, because it's one single site plan, all the different building height measurements have to be based upon. Now, that usually meant something that could easily be solved for with the larger multifamily buildings, but as we found when we get to the proposed townhomes along Fern Street, this is CH7, 8A, and 8B, that becomes slightly more difficult as we get to smaller independent buildings approaching that topography change near 18th Street. And what that looks like in a real life example is one of the proposed townhome sticks, if you will, does achieve the envisioned form of development that we were expecting along Fern Street. This is that 3-story vision that you see on the right here. But because of how the average site elevation is measured for that larger block, proposed as one single site plan, it's actually measuring as 46 feet. And because that's how we are measuring height, the sector plan and the CO Crystal City zoning district, that becomes non-complying with the sector plan. So what we're trying to do is figure out, is there a way where all these different elements begin to overlap, and we can potentially introduce a secondary way to measure height, such that if we are seeing something that is compliant with the vision in the build form that we're anticipating, helping us with the transition that was always envisioned for that edge of the district, could we rely on something other than feet to get us to that outcome? Additionally, and this is just some more context, one of the maps that's in the sector plan and also in the zoning district does speak to the land uses that are permitted on each block. For the most part, much of the Crystal City site plans that you'll see usually have a fairly broad mix of uses that are permitted, mixture of commercial, residential, and hotel. Here, in the bright yellow, we are actually dealing with one of the few instances where only residential uses are permitted. And what that does is it actually informs some of our thinking in that if we were to come up with some solutions, we now know that the form of development that would be introduced there can only be residential. And therefore, some of the potential unintended consequences we might see, typically with mixed-use development and some of creative solutions that might happen from time to time on the ground floor, they are not as likely to occur here, given that we are not just dealing with residential, but likely smaller forms of residential development, since we know those 2 blocks are likely going to be pursuing infill development. So with that in mind, what we're trying to propose to solve the issue is introduce kind of a new tier in the heights map that only applies to those western edges of those 2 blocks. And here we're simply indicating that 3 stories is the envisioned form of development. And therefore that would allow us to move away from the measurement in feet and not essentially maintain this kind of punitive approach where the average site elevation on a topographically challenged site begins to get us further away from the envisioned outcome that the sector plan had for those 2 blocks. So it's a fairly minor and technical change, but I think it still achieves the desired outcome that we had without really introducing any brand new height categories or overly complicating the situation, knowing that this is pretty much the only space that we're envisioning this happening, given the various factors involved. So with that in mind, the final slide that I had is really dealing with the schedule. We did provide a informational session to the Crystal and Pentagon Cities Council in late June. We do anticipate highlighting this in early September at a community meeting, which is primarily going to be focusing on the site plan amendment involving those townhomes, Crystal Houses site plan, and then the RTA would happen in September and ultimately conclude in October with a consideration of this amendment and the latest site plan amendment for Crystal Houses. And with that, I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you. Okay, so any questions? Jim, right here.
Crystal Houses. None of us figured that out when we were doing this. I mean, I chaired it, so I'm just as guilty, but we never figured that this was going to be an issue.
When you're,
Yeah, no, it's like, oh my God.
I'm used to discussing much total building heights. Rare.
Okay. Have you talked to Aurora Highlands yet about this?
We are providing updates that kind of package this together. So I think there's a growing sense of information and education that's happening
But
there.
you'll definitely want to talk to them before the community meeting, let them digest it a bit, understand what's going on. It shouldn't be a problem because they were supportive of Crystal Houses, if I remember correctly. But they don't like surprises either, so.
So far, a lot of the feedback I think is centered on the proposal itself. Because what's happening is while the form is not changing on those townhomes, the unit count is, because we're kind of dealing, the change between now and 2019 is that we're dealing with a new model of delivering townhomes, kind of having two fronts, if you will, which is quite innovative, very form-based, if you will, but it's a change in density, at the end of the day. So I think better understanding the impacts of that, the parking, the landscaping, the access, that's really what seems to be occupying a lot of our time. This technical aspect of how we measure height is beginning to creep its way in there, and we are noting it. Thus far, we haven't had too many comments.
But even if it's informal, hey, this is going on, it's coming, we're going to be coming to you, be aware that this is happening. Because I mean, everybody, I think, like townhouses were going to be along Fern Street. It was a really good transition. So, that was one of the attractions of that whole master site plan. So anyway, it's just my 2 cents, sorry.
I'll be hearing from this.
So, because those heights are always, as you know. So, yes, they always are.
Out of a house.
So, could conceivably, I mean, I can't think of any because it wouldn't benefit, I think, a builder to do this, but so, I mean, typically now you're going stories versus feet. Would a builder be able to now put in extra, like, all of a sudden the story becomes 12 feet because they're putting a loft or something? I mean, is there something that would prohibit, so all of a sudden the 3 stories are going to become this crazy thing that nobody ever thought it would be?
There's always the likelihood of that, however rare.
But there's an approval process there.
There is, and I think at the end of the day, the county board, I think, has to look at, make findings. I think between now and September, we're going to look at some of the more interesting residential applications that we've seen. Has anybody tried to exploit something like this? And, what is the worst case scenario that we've seen that has gotten approval? And based on that analysis, does that feed into an evolution of this proposal where we put some additional protections, if you will, so that this isn't.
Because Nia's point's a good one, because are these going to be affordable units or are they going to be market rate units, these townhouses? They for sale or rent?
Actually, I'm going to ask my colleague Emma, who's on the call, if she can answer.
Was the question about if they're going to be for sale or for rent?
Right.
These are going to be for sale.
That sort of gives the incentive for high ceilings and the luxury unit, justify a $2 million price tag. So we want.
So I don't think they'll be custom. Like we've got floor plans in our minor site plan amendment application, which is kind of a different topic of this. I don't think that there's going to be an ability for them to have like 12-foot ceilings in these townhomes, if that's helpful.
Well, they could make them all 12-foot ceiling. I mean, we've seen that, where they want them really, really big. Because it's a great thing.
Just one more thing. In order to keep their minor site plan amendment criteria, they would have to keep a height increase under 12 feet. And with what they're proposing right now, it'll be 12 feet. So they can't go any higher than that.
Okay.
Gotcha. That was.
Okay, great.
So that is just specific for this project. I definitely hear what you're saying about the zoning ordinance amendment, though, and it's a good point.
Yeah,
part of the benefit of kind of surgically intervening here on just those two blocks, what we're seeing is that pretty soon this block will be one less that we have to consider, because this is pretty much all we're going to see on that western end. They have other site amenities, a public park. You're not going to see any other development on that western edge, which means the only other place where something like this could be potentially exploited is the north with Crystal Towers.
Which is being developed right now.
There's the beauty of that, if you can call it that, is that even if somebody were to exploit that, what you have across the street on the western side of Fern Street is not the same as we have in Crystal houses, because the density has gone up. Thinking of like just north of the Dominion substation, where you have mid-rise buildings. So
yeah, we won't care as much, presumably.
They're
That's a
already,
great way of putting it, yeah.
they're already mid-rise buildings on that
Yeah.
wrapped around towers
Right.
The impact
already.
is nice.
Yeah, and it's already being, we already went through site plan for the East Street side.
Exactly.
So anybody viewing this from any place else in the county or hearing about this, this would not become a precedent setter because it's specific to this area. It's because the topography was challenging and, created a difference of where the 35-foot could really be measured. So that you would be applying this special stuff if it comes up in another part of a neighborhood, wouldn't just automatically say 3 stories.
Right, and it's not that we don't have any other places where we measure height in stories. We do primarily in Columbia Pike. That's the other form-based area of the county. But here, I think we try to very clearly outline the criteria that are causing this to happen. The large blocks, the 35-foot height restriction, the grade change. And if you try to apply that anywhere else, they just, not all three are present. So I think that allows us to be more strategic here and not allow us to kind of balloon into something that perhaps has unintended consequences.
Any other final comments, questions, concerns?
Nope.
Right, this one was straightforward. All right, so I think at this point we move to public comment.
So what we've typically done and have been asked to do, Mr. Chair, is, so I have 3 members of the public who'd like to provide some comment to you all tonight. What we typically like to do is have our virtual speakers speak first. And so what I'll do is I'll call on Thomas Gargan first. And then I'll, if I can pull up the clock, I have a 3-minute timer. Here we go. So, Mr. Gargan, are you there, sir? You're free to unmute yourself and turn on your camera if you'd like. Okay, perhaps Mr. Gargan will come back. I had another person who also wanted to speak. They were listed as Tatiana and Paul in the chat. Tatiana or Paul, are you still with us virtually?
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Okay, great. So I would like to have Mr. Gargan speak first. We're in the same community here, if that's possible, and maybe he has issues unmuting himself. If not.
That's fine. Mr. Gargan, are you there, sir? Unfortunately, I don't have the sort of technical capabilities to unmute Mr. Gargan. He's okay.
He has audio issues, he says.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. Well, listen a moment.
Do you want to make it? Okay. So we have concern about, obviously Mr. Garden has spent a lot of time looking into the situation for a while and representing us previously and submitting complaints and concerns on our behalf. In our community here, we do have the sober houses you guys were describing, and our experience is very different than what you have been describing. In our community, we're in a townhome in Boston right now, and I'm looking out of my window and 100 yards across, there's one such home. And it is not exactly how you guys describing it. It'd be lovely if it was. Our experience is very, very different in this environment. We were not obviously aware initially that these homes were used for this purpose. And the activity that we observe is rather concerning and makes us feel unsafe, to be honest. We are also here within walking distance of Washington Knee High School. So we certainly have a lot of students that are walking a street all day long, going to school and returning from school as they get into Boston Mall via Stewart, and we are on Stewart Street right here. So in our condition, we have expressed concern about the way these houses are operated and the activity that we observe every day. And it is not exactly feeling as a safe environment. So the other thing is, you guys are talking about property values, which we very much appreciate. All of us want to raise our property values, but these homes look very, very different. There's certain days there's couches brought to the front porch. There's other days there's tables brought to the front porch. The upkeep is not really matching what the rest of the homes around look like, and it severely affects how our homes are perceived as well. So there's a lot of different areas that, for us, just not lining up with your goals the ways you have outlined them, which obviously we appreciate the way you've outlined them, but it's not the reality of it. So we'd like to make sure that these concerns are considered, that Mr. Garden has shared over time and documented. And he's specifically had prepared to discuss the legality of the issues of how these homes are acquired and operated as well, which I would like you to take into consideration. He's had written communications previously submitted that have not been, I believe, I have not seen responded to or addressed.
Yep, and I've joined. I don't know if you can hear me.
Thank you.
Mr. Gargan, thank you so much. I think you're our next speaker.
Okay, yep. Can you hear me?
We can.
Absolutely.
Okay, yeah, sorry about the audio issues there. Yeah, no, I mean, I think the bottom line is, it's premature to send this proposed zoning text amendment, at least in its current form, to the board to see if it can be, posted for advertising. One of the troubling parts is the July 11th county manager recommendation to the board states that there are no known issues as of the date of this report, and the staff does not anticipate the proposed zoning changes to carry any adverse impacts. That's just simply not accurate. The whole reason this came about is that Oxford House, is asking for reasonable accommodation now because I submitted, when I was president of the Homeowners Association, complaints about the two Oxford houses, one at 114 North Stewart Street and one at 1118 North Stewart Street. And those complaints have gone unaddressed for 2 years. I submitted them in August of 2022, and the Office of Zoning Enforcement has been working with Oxford House's attorneys, and the county attorney's office has been working with them for 2 years. And this is finally, it's gotten to the point where they've submitted a reasonable accommodation. But all of this came about, and I apologize, I'm rushing because I know I've got a short amount of time here, but all of this came about because of numerous issues that we've had in terms of these houses, frequently parking in our association's parking lot and guest spaces. They have 8 adult men in each house, and so parking on this block is incredibly difficult because they have 8 people in each house, many of which, if not most of which, have vehicles, and they don't have parking for 8 vehicles in each house. County services, rescue, police, firefighters have been called there more times than we can count. On June 12th, 2022, in the middle of the afternoon, one of the residents staggered across the street and proceeded to urinate in the middle of our parking lot. We had 2 dead bodies removed, one from each of the houses at a point last summer. I think it was in like April and June. A dead body from each of the individual houses was removed. Another resident got ejected and spent a multi-hour manic episode in our association parking lot. And when we called the police just drove by, asked the guy if he was okay, and his friend told him he was fine, and the police left. We've had multiple instances of people being observed using drugs in parked cars in our parking lot. I mean, these are not good neighbors. And the idea that Oxford House, I see I'm running out of time here, but all of the questions you asked about Oxford House and the certification and all that, I could answer all those questions, but I will tell you that the characterization that I heard in this meeting is not consistent with the reality of these Oxford houses and court cases where they have lost challenges under the Fair Housing Act.
Got it. Thank you. I appreciate your comments.
Mr. Chair, what I'd like to do is I'd like to turn to Mr. Stein first for comment, and then I have an additional person who just messaged and said I'd like to provide public comment. So, Mr. Stein, it's yours.
This is on the first item. I wasn't going to speak. I was just going to get some information and see where it was heading. And I can't speak for Rayfom because we don't have any position on this yet. It's just what came up. I am speaking strictly for myself as a person who's followed this discussion and many times participated in discussions since the beginning of Housing Arlington. Personally, I'm very pleased to see this come forward. I hope it can help to mitigate some of the more onerous restrictions imposed on properties because of nonconformity. This proposal lets out one of the few discussions that could help with preservation from the discussions on HCDs and MRS. That was the original goal of HCD. That was the section of Housing Arlington that was to deal with it. And now I guess MRS. I too have concerns about rent increases, but I feel that will do much more to not only preserve units, but the opportunity made in their homes. I think it would be able not only to help with affordable properties, but also with modest and middle income housing. I've seen far too many of my neighbors driven out of my community by redevelopment. I hope what comes of this will help preserve communities and encourage people to remain in their homes, both rented and owned, if they want to stay. As an example of what I've seen over the years, I've watched a landlord who wanted to stay in place and keep her renters in their units, encouraged instead to get out of the way and sell to a developer who's planning to tear it down. I hope this would make it easier for landlords like that, what I'm referring to keep her tenants in their apartments and give it an opportunity to age in place. She was very connected to them, and I was so dismayed, at some of the attitudes towards her being in the way, sort of. And by the way, the Fort Myers Heights North Study, which I spent many years, unfortunately, it was supposed to be just a matter of months, involved, was not just about building form, it was also about preservation of the neighborhood, the community, and keeping people in their homes. So I know there are some things that need to be worked out, but I'm hopeful to see it come forward personally at this point. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We can bounce to the last comment.
Yeah, and actually, Mr. Chair, I've received, you saw in the press and the chat, Tatiana and Paul. Paul would also like to address the commission. You have 16 more minutes on your schedule, so
Why not? We're already here. That's
great. So, Mr. O'Reilly, you're welcome to unmute, and if you'd like to turn on your camera, you're happy to do so. You have 3 minutes.
Yes, thank you for the committee's time. I am really following up on some of Tom's comments. I'm a resident of North Stewart Street and live about 2 blocks from 2 of the recovery houses. And I do have, we have a lot of concerns in our community about some of the results of having the sheer number of individuals and turnover of individuals in these residences that frankly, in the 5 years that I've owned my property, has led to really unacceptable upkeep of the properties. At times, frankly, some health issues. There was a rat infestation about eight months ago that had to be brought to the county's attention. We've had, issues with frequent rubbish and trash left out. And I think it is some ways a function of just the number of adults living in the residences, 8 men living in 2 to 3 bedroom homes, a lot of turnover, of folks residing there for a few months at a time. I think these just properties should be something that the county should be very careful about instituting policies regarding these homes, just because we've had a very sort of negative effect in our community in our experience with them. And we are very close to Washington and Liberty High School. We do have, a number of children in the neighborhood, and it's just something that I think should be examined, very critically, looking at some of the residences and the current status. So really reinforcing a lot of things Tom has already brought to the attention of folks at the county. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Mr. O'Reilly. Paul, if you are on, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hi, yes, thank you. I'll try to make this brief. I'll just make a few points just for consideration. And yeah, I share the same concern. I do want to highlight, commendable, the previous presentation asked an important question: who benefits and who is burdened? And I notice we as concerned residents have not been afforded that question of the burden. And property value was a major topic in the previous discussion, and it does not seem to be a concern of those here as well. And I want to voice that. And I think one thing that I learned tonight that even raised more concern was this fact that it's independently operated and managed, and it shows. And it absolutely shows if I look out the window. I mean, it looks like a movie set from Wired, and cars on the lawn. And if there's no oversight, why? I can't comprehend that. It's a major concern for me. And it goes back to the underlying, all participants and those impacted, property owner, neighbors, and those residents. We all have something to, I guess, participate here. But I do want to comment, if we have a passive landlord, a passive property owner who has no interest in the property and is deriving profits, substantial profits, if I do the math, by the way, more than I can get for my more prized property here, by the way. And there's no upkeep. That is, although it has no legal reference or definition, the definition of a slumlord. And that, I've seen these in big cities where I've lived. And that is what, at least with respect to the one property, I can speak to. And it's, that's my concern. No oversight. It's nice that everyone on the call is so altruistic, but I notice if it's right next to you, yeah, we all have different views. We all have to pull our weight here, and that means the landlord or Oxford House has to either have oversight or put some investment into the property. And that's where I will end it. It's give and take on everyone, please.
Thank you very much. So I believe that's everything. Got everything out here. So I suppose each individual staff presentation covered what's going on in next steps, and I think we'll just be in contact. If you have any questions, concerns, feel free to direct them towards staff, and they will do their best to answer them. But otherwise, I think we're done. Right?
Yep. Thank you so much, Mr. Chair.
Yeah. Thank you all for bearing with me. This is my first time